In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
It feels so good to be alive.
We had the kids' future plan before they were born.
Got all my family by my side.
First date, I took Venus and Serena to the tennis court.
Wipe this black off if I try.
I knew I had champions.
That's why I lift my head with pride.
Venus and Serena gonna shake up this world.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 273 of Popcorn Theology. I'm Richard.
And I'm James.
And I'm Miles.
And today we are covering King Ricard, which you've already clicked on.
Yeah, so
we kind of like build that up sometimes,
Wait
like we're like surprising people, but we know that they've already clicked on it.
Yeah.
Like I try to come up with like cool ways to say what we're covering, but at the same time they know.
They already
know, right?
We've already got them.
I also feel like this choice wasn't self-indulgent at all for Richard.
Yeah.
I do like the title at the very least. At the very least, I enjoyed the title.
It's funny because some movies basically pick themselves. Throughout the summer, it's really really easy to pick movies because it's basically what's the new release this week. And then we hit this point where it's like, our Richard's going to be on the pod. Let's do King Ricard.
And I know it was a controversial casting, but I really think Will Smith nailed me in his portrayal. I think he did a really great job. So, people will say, did they really have to get Will Smith to play Richard Foltz? But I feel like it worked out pretty good.
He just sort of becomes the character. It's uncanny.
He did. It was amazing. Yeah. It really was.
It just I didn't even see him.
Why are we doing this movie? I don't even remember. Was it your idea, Miles? Technically, was it Richard?
Yeah. It was my idea.
It wasn't. It actually was not mine. You all are putting it on me.
That's right.
It wasn't.
He's humble.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine just about how I don't usually care whether an actor or actress has been canceled, because I'm always watching movies from people whose worldviews I disagree with and behavior I disagree with. And so I was like, I think it was in the context of the Flash movie. I was like, I've always thought Ezra Miller was weird. Just everybody caught up to me. And so I want to watch a Flash movie. And then I was like, yeah, for that matter, Will Smith, there's this. I mean, I know plenty of people have much podcast blood has been spilt on judging his let's say, lack of wisdom and his poor moment at the was it Academy Awards? Yeah. But I was like, let's go watch this movie because it got an award for a reason. And I thought this movie was great. I'm glad I sat down and watched it and didn't cancel the movie for the sake of his off-screen behavior.
So it was your idea to cover this film. Would you say you did a good bit of planning going into this episode?
Oh yeah, so I had a plan for the success of this episode since before the podcast was even born. I've got a 78-page plan, and nearly everything in my plan is coming true.
Nice.
I will say for the record, for the listeners, he is the only one who wrote anything down in advance and shared it, and it's only a 6-page plan, to be honest. But still,
now, hold on. I did, but I hand wrote.
You did hand write
They're
some
here.
notes.
I have.
And I'm going to shoehorn these thoughts in. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Well, I have some thoughts, but I decided to wait until we'd already moved all the way to the podcast and then just sort of surprise them on you guys.
Sure.
It's good.
No,
that's good stuff right there.
I like my notes.
That was my King Ricard operation.
My notes make me feel safe. This might jump forward a bit into content of the movie, but there's a moment in which people challenge Richard saying, you are so afraid of failure. And a lot of his behavior in the movie that ends up breeding success seems to come from a fear of failure. I could relate to that a little bit. For me, it's like I need a certain amount of notes in our podcast notes before I can relax about the pod, even if we don't follow them straight to the letter.
It's like a security blanket for you.
It's my security
blanket. You
blanket.
have lots of words written in that note.
Yeah.
Whereas this time, I just decided to skip the juniors note writing and just wait and just go straight to Wimbledon and the event itself. I'm just here.
In the history of podcasting, this is how you succeed. You go to juniors, you write your notes, you come together on the Google Doc, and then
You
we
go
win.
see if James covered it already 10 years ago, and if he did, you steal all that.
You steal
luck
all
this
those
time.
notes. Yeah.
No luck. No luck this time.
But if you guys do move to Washington, you could join my training camp, and you could drive around in a golf cart. And that's
I'm going to need an RV.
well. Do I believe in you that much?
How am I
going to
get there, James?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, do you believe in Richard or not?
Yeah, come on. Come on now.
So I think that if we're talking about we're watching a movie with Will Smith, despite the controversy, does that mean we're using an open stance, not a closed stance?
That's where you get the power from. Open stance. That's where you
That
get
is.
the power. Don't be debating me about the power. It's not the closed stance. You need the open podcast stance. That's what I've been teaching y'all.
Well, we do have the power, right? We actually we have a reason to think we have the power, right? How are our downloads doing, Richard? This is probably as someone who's been around since the first download, you should probably drop this one.
I haven't, and it's interesting too because like for years, like I was all about checking in on that, seeing how we're doing, what things make it have upticks in the downloads or valleys and that sort of thing. And I've kind of been like hands off for like a year and a half now with that. So this, like I'm reading it in the notes for the first time, and I'm pretty excited. We hit, if you guys are telling the truth, because I don't know, we hit 500,000 total downloads last week.
Yep.
We finally hit half a million.
Thank
David
you. I was going to
Shanley
say,
Is that
screenshot
true?
me. Yeah, half
I
a million.
was going to say 500. No, you got to say 500,000. That just sounds
Half
way better.
of
Half a million
downloads.
So we are halfway through my 70-page plan. I've been telling you, million downloads. Every time you see me, I'm on TV talking million downloads.
Yeah, I'm not going to settle for this 500,000. What if this episode's even better?
Yeah.
And we get more.
Just
Like, you
let
gotta really...
this episode play, and we'll see where we're at before we sign our Nike podcast deal. Let's see how this one. Let's see how
that's
this one
coming.
plays.
That's wild. 500,000. I don't remember what it was at last time. Like when I was kind of keeping up on it.
Wait,
and checking it
Popcorn Theology.
pretty regularly.
Just do it. Is that their? I don't even know if that's
I
their
think
slogan
so.
anymore.
I think just do it. No, it's still just do it. That's great. That's a great slogan. But that's pretty cool. Like I don't consider it really my accomplishment. I joined just about a year and a half ago.
Hey,
But
you're a
it's-
part of it though, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't think we were that close to that last time I looked. Like, have we had a pretty good uptick in the last year or so?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. That's surprising to me that we've got that many.
I just know that we have loyal
A
fans.
welcome one.
And it's really interesting to think that 500,000 times people have engaged media from a godly worldview as this Popcorn Theology community. It's pretty great.
Yeah,
That was pretty
There's something to this idea, I think.
something to it.
I think maybe it's going to catch on.
Yeah, it's fun. I had a Popcorn Theology event at my church this last week. A couple young adult groups met together. We watched Shrek 2 and then just did a circle discussion about it. What'd you see? And it was great. It was great to just see people's eyes open. And just a reminder that it's not actually that hard if you just do it. Yep, they have to work that in there.
Hey.
Just do it. Watch a movie and be ready to say, hey, who do these characters remind you of in your life? Do they remind you of God or anybody in the Bible? How can you preach the gospel? Have you ever felt like an ogre inside that you don't deserve a happy ending?
Shrek is a pretty good one. Shrek is a pretty
great.
good one to do too.
That's true.
Great.
A lot of low-hanging fruit there that people, and it kind of surprises people. Like, even though it is low-hanging fruit, it's just such a popcorn type of movie that it's almost surprising if someone's not used to thinking that way.
Yeah.
That it has so much in it, but it really does.
It's fun from going. I went straight from watching Shrek into watching King Richard, where their attitudes are basically opposite. Like one has zero confidence in success. Just stay away from me. I'm a big, ugly, nasty ogre. To somebody who is completely confident that if he writes a plan and sticks to it, he can be in the champion-making business.
Now, see, so I got to admit, I had no idea what to think going into this movie because other than obviously knowing the existence of Venus and Serena Williams and their kind of the stuff of tennis and the other sport ball, which I tend to not pay a ton of attention to. I know the names of the biggest people, so of course I knew who the two girls were. Actually, until this movie came out, I didn't even understand that Richard Williams was the thing. Somehow I missed that. I mean, I was never watching sports, so I had very little idea of what I was going to get coming into this movie at all. And I really didn't have, other than they're awesome, I didn't know their career. I didn't know how their history. So for me, this was very much a first time learning much of anything about the Williams, Richard, Venus, Serena, the rest of the family. Obviously not important because I don't remember the names. Which is terrible.
I remember Tundi now.
Yeah,
because
okay,
of the
there you go.
scenes in the movie. Yeah.
So what about you guys? So this was sort of like just like jumping into the cold water, getting everything.
Same here. I'll jump in real quick and echo that entirely. Like for me, watching this, like you said, I knew the names. I'd heard the names. I knew that there was some family relation there. I don't know if I would have even known that they were sisters. I just knew they were related in some way. For all I knew, they might have been cousins. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I had no idea. So for me going into this, like, it's really just like watching a movie. You know that feeling you get when you're watching a movie that's based on a true story, but you don't know the true story. So it's just a good movie to you at that point. Yeah. You're not looking for how accurate is this, how is this true to what was the actual situation as far as I already knew it. I didn't have any of that. So this movie could be completely just painting a not correct picture of what happened with them, and I wouldn't know it. But I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
So
it's almost the thing about it's almost like a movie that I doubt if somebody pitched this story without it being true, nobody would have picked it up. You know, I think probably that's one thing that's just so compelling about it. Like a family from the hood making a plan, sticking to it, and having two Michael Jordans of their sport in the same family. It's incredible. Like I don't follow tennis that closely, but I do know that when there's general discussions about greatest athletes of all time, that Serena Williams is often on that list in the sense that she is the most dominant athlete arguably the most dominant athlete in her sport of all time. So if you think Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Tiger Woods type caliber of just incredibly dominant athlete in her sport. And then she popped onto my radar in the last few years because people have talked about like the transgender athlete thing, talking about how even though Serena is the most dominant athlete in her sport of all time, if she were to be in the men's league, she'd be pretty high up there. But it's not really fair to compare them, that kind of thing. So politically, she was wrapped up into conversations. But I can't say I've followed tennis that closely. And kind of like you guys, this was a new story to me for the most part. I had no idea that they had even grown up in a humble place. I thought that they kind of rose up in the same ranks that you see as like people who are in the tennis clubs as a kid. I thought that maybe that's how they rose up, and they were just gifted, you know.
Yeah.
But arguably, yeah, that the movie is basically arguing the opposite of that point. That discipline and wisdom and just raw hard work produced two of the greatest athletes in our generation of all time.
Well, I'm excited to talk about it. I hope it's one that our other listeners have, maybe like us, they were maybe late to the game, but maybe they'll grab it and see it and listen to the podcast. And as with always, I'm sure we won't get to everything that we could talk about. So hopefully if we miss anything along the way, they'll be sure to share it afterwards. Which is always a good reminder just to tell people how they can leverage this episode for their own use and others, right?
Yeah, we love pulling you into this community. So if you're a type of person, we often on our Facebook group ask people, "Hey, we're gonna cover this movie. What are your popcorn theology notes?" We love it when you guys include notes. Like one of our often contributors from the group, Rory, is with us in the Discord chat. He's one of our patron saints. He gets to watch us record here, and we'll have one of his points to discuss. So you can help us write our notes, help shape the podcast, because we want this really to be a collective experience as best as we can. And it would also really help if you would share episodes. This week, I had a friend of mine ask, "Hey, what podcast do you recommend?" And I recommended a few, and then I was like, "And of course, Popcorn Theology." And one of his friends was like, it's still around. I love movies and theology. And I was like, oh, yes, it's still around.
Yeah.
You know,
That's all.
Yeah, sometimes people fall off the bandwagon. Oh, I've done it with my own podcast too. Like other ones that I listen to, you sort of fall away, and then you realize, oh, I haven't listened in so long. And so
then when you show up, you have so much to catch up on, which is actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like when you fall behind in a show and you can binge like 3 or 4 episodes. You can do that with us if you fell off the wagon. There's lots of new content.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's another thing too. People oftentimes will like the episode. We post it on Facebook. It's also just a great extra thing to share it to your page. Then people see that you're listening, you like it. It's easier to find. Just lots of different ways that you can help spread the love. If you are a listener and you think more people should be having these conversations, use us all you want to bring your friends into those conversations with you. Spread that around, have them take a listen, see what they think. That's certainly how I've never pointed people to the website and had them check it out. It's always when I'm sharing it on my social media and sort of resharing the actual link to the post. So I just encourage people to do that. I mean, we do have other ways people can interact with us then. They can get onto the Discord server. They can obviously just join on the talk on the Facebook page. But of course, I believe our Patreon supporters or patron saints actually hit a milestone too. I think we just hit the 6 figures on the number of peoples in our Patreon supporter group. So 100 and counting. Nice. At least those who are interacting with us online, if there are some other silent contributors out there.
Oh, 3 figures. I was like, 6 figures. We're rich. No.
3 figures. You're right.
Yeah, when he said 6 figures, I was going to let it
let's
go.
Let's go check that. I'm quitting my job.
Right.
No.
That's my.
He's just not settling, man. He's not taking the first offer.
That's further on my. That's further on my 78-page plan.
Sir, on the 78
that's coming up.
Yeah.
But we should probably. Why don't we sort of walk off for about 8 minutes and let all the listeners
let things cool off a little bit,
kind of freak out. We can ice them a little bit, and then we'll come back in.
Yep.
And play the rest of this match.
This episode of Popcorn Theology is brought to you by Missionalware. Missionalware has a large selection of high-quality apparel, drinkware, art, and more, all from a Reformed Christian perspective. Check out missionalware.com and tell them Popcorn Theology sent you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn Theology. If you want to hear more from us, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast catcher.
Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and share this episode with your friends.
Assuming you have friends. To sponsor more content like this, consider supporting Popcorn Theology through Patreon. Then you'll make some friends.
For just $1 a month, you can have friends. You can become a patron saint and be added to our exclusive Facebook group, where you can interact, influence, and vote on future episodes of the podcast.
Well, let's get back to the episode.
All right, we are back, and I got to say, after that break, I'm kind of feeling off my game a little bit. Like, I was really in the zone, and now it's just I feel like my pacing's off, and I'm going to try to recover, guys. I'm going to try to recover.
Come on.
Why don't y'all cover for me for a minute here?
We got to recover. Get back to the center. Open up that stance. Keep those feet moving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But with this movie, I came out with it with just a pretty hopeful, positive feeling at the end of this movie, and largely it was because I think that this movie demonstrates in Richard that the blessings of proverbial wisdom. So throughout the movie, I thought that Richard embodied how you put a lot of the biblical proverbs to work. At the end of the movie, there's this, I don't know what they call it, end title, where they're talking about Richard, even for the rest of his life. It said, as their coach, Richard continued to place family, patience, and education above early success. And so there's this idea that this guy had the 78-page plan, but what you might expect from a father of an athlete is more like the father in The Breakfast Club who is driving their kid crazy by saying, you've got to win, you got to be number one, or Ricky Bobby's dad, if you ain't first, you're last, right? Or like a lot of the other tennis parents in the movie. But Richard was incredibly driven, but he had a plan to keep family, patience, and education above all else. And so we've been joking about it a lot, but one of the first lines of the movie is, I've had a 78-page plan for their career before they was even born. So he has this vision. Yeah. He sees somebody making $40,000 for a match in tennis, and he goes, I'm in the wrong business. Goes to his wife and says, we need to make 2 more kids.
And it's interesting you talking about that line at the end where it talks about how he continued to put family, education, patience above early success. Like, the movie contrasts a lot how he dealt with his kids in that situation versus how others were doing it. And he had criticism for the way other parents were doing the tennis thing with their kids. But at the same time, there were people that were looking at him thinking it was too hard on his kids. He worked them too hard. It was a weird kind of contrast it was showing, like, depending on what the frame of reference was. He was either too hard or not hard enough or whatever. But I'll tell you what it made me think of. Like, you saw when those other kids were losing in juniors, how distressed they were and how upset they were, like their entire identity was crashing. And I think that was kind of supposed to reflect on how their parents had guided them through it. Yeah. But with his, they just had this confidence about them. And we see later, even when they lose, they're able to bounce back from that and be good sports and all that sort of thing. But I will say what it put me in mind of is in the Christian faith in life, like this idea that as Christians, we believe in the sinfulness of man. We believe in total depravity or whatever you want to call it. And so that there is this idea of like things could be better, you could do better, all that sort of thing. But at the same time, we have this idea of imago Dei, that we're made in the image of God, and that there's a value there that can't be lessened by our performance and all those sorts of things. I think it was a pretty cool picture. Like, he's really doing both.
Yeah.
And in a way that the other parents weren't. And I thought that was a really neat thing to see. A parent being really hard on their kid and expecting a lot, but being at the same time incredibly encouraging and confident in them.
And it is split the difference in, like, maybe instead of hard, just the right use of the word driven, right? Like there's and there's a middle ground that I think that Christians need to struggle with in raising their children in the faith. And it was kind of interesting in the movie. Yeah, you have the neighbor who's like, let your kids be kids, and it's like, yeah, look how yours turned out, which they allude to at least.
Yeah,
and I remember even just in practical things, like my dad didn't just let me coast through high school. Like, I started out working during the summers, doing like mowing lawns and different things. My senior year, I did have a job while I was in high school, still graduated valedictorian. But so I worked after school. Like he was instilling some of those values in me. That was kind of a family concept that they came up with. Obviously not quite to the extent of Richard, but there's that balance of how do you let your kids enjoy having them be kids, but you don't take that too far, and you are prepping them. He wasn't driving them like the other tennis parents, and of course, then even he pushes back on Macy later. I mean, we see them, but they're even driven in school too. Like, they've learned that value, so they're learning 4 languages. They're getting straight A's. Like they're driven in a positive way. And I think when you take that over to the Christianity, I mean, there's. When it comes to catechizing your kids, when it comes to raising them in the faith, when it comes to issues like how much they're in the world or you just follow the path of the world. I was thinking about even how it's like, this is the way it's done. This is the way you got to put them in juniors. You got to do these things. He's like, you know what? Sometimes the Christian path is not going to be following the ways of the world to success either, or doing it according to the pattern of the world. So I think there are a lot of corollaries for us to explore in the idea of raising kids in that Deuteronomy 6 way, where you're teaching them the things when you get up, when you lay down, when you sit, when you eat, we do everything in life. You're trying to instill them. He's kind of doing that with the 78-page plan. Christians would be doing it with the Word of God. Like, how do I walk them through this in every piece of life and drive them in a positive way and that doesn't look like the world, but yet doesn't drive them to burnout and hatred. And I think we've seen that on the other side of legalism and fundamentalism, to where kids are leaving the church because their parents catechized them like those tennis parents at the club.
But the thing that gets me is that, so like when you have the way the scenes were filmed, there was a lot of great showing, don't tell in this movie.
Yeah.
Like when they were training out in the rain, they're all giggling together.
Yeah.
Right? It's still fun, even though he requires straight A's, multiple languages, everybody succeed, everybody work hard all of the time. But they're enjoying each other. And I think that the thing that he had in common with all these other crazy tennis parents and stuff is the value of hard work and diligence. You're like Proverbs 10:4 says, "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." I think that's probably that would be a very good memory verse for this movie. You know, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Or Proverbs 15:22, "Without counsel plans fail, but with many advisors they succeed." And so I loved in this movie how Richard starts out the whole time he's speaking with an uneducated kind of dialect, semi-ebonics type way of speaking. But he, in the areas that he knows are valuable, is really educated. He's found counselors in books, in audio tapes, in coaches. He's pursuing counsel for all of his plans. He had the strange rigidity with his plan, but also flexibility with his knowledge, seeking out people. So it's diligence and seeking out wisdom that was so commendable to me. I just watching him single-minded drive at the hope of success and doing as much as possible to get there.
I think it's interesting that you point that out. I think my mind hadn't quite connected all those dots yet, because we see him turn down so much counsel, or what so many other people are offering in terms of counsel or ideas, that it almost you could walk away. And then I think he does start to get hard-headed at one point, and he is rebuked in a really positive way in a very cautious and meaningful way by his wife. I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
And yet, I think they show us where he's turning down the counsel. But you're right. I think as the movie's condensing everything, it does, between the cracks, they do mention he's been seeking out other coaches, and he's been trying to get the best of everything. He is seeking out other voices. They focus in the movie a lot on those moments where there's tension, where he's disregarding one. But that would be true. I mean, like, there are times where if we're getting good counsel,
as you gain knowledge, you're going to start having your own opinions based on all the counsel you've already received.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to happen. And you even see, like you're speaking to, Miles, like he's going to work. I guess he was some kind of security guard or something, whatever he was doing. I can't recall. He was dressed up like a security guard. But he sits down, he gets his gun on him, sits down, and out come 5 or 6 magazines where he's trying to learn more about the sport and strategy and all that stuff. So like he definitely is seeking out counsel. Yeah. I think it's a very good human portrayal, though, because he's someone that in general I think embodies that proverb, but at times does reject counsel, and it kind of gives you this very human character of sometimes he's right to do so, sometimes he's wrong to do so, and here's how someone can help you navigate that and that sort of thing. I thought it was a pretty cool picture.
Yeah, like a very human picture.
The film may have glossed over a bit. I mean, we hear about, I would have to look into the history, because they talk about his other businesses. They talk about, there may have been other areas in his life where he hit the wall and his ideas weren't that great. And I think they allude to it so that it's not completely absent from the narrative. But of course, they are driving toward a particular facet where there was a win. And so people shouldn't miss that. It seems like he was a very mixed bag in a number of ways, even morally. He's about family, but there was a weird scene about
other kids,
some infidelity, and so that's things where it's like, well, okay, it was nice that they threw in that he was definitely not perfect, and so even though a lot of biopics sometimes can just gloss over everything and really paint a one-sided picture, I think you really have to pay attention to catch it, but you do catch. Just like we look at any biblical character that isn't Jesus, David, Solomon, even the guy with the chief of wisdom blunders in some significant ways. So I think, and we do see Richard's pride in an extreme way too. So it's interesting that they do give us the full character, but they're showing us the winds of wisdom, and I don't think that's bad if we're focusing on a particular narrative. It's like, well, let's look at what happens in the winds of wisdom and Proverbs and where can ambition have good fruit, even if on the other hand we might want to talk about where it can go awry.
Maybe one way to think about it is, so it's like most movies about the struggle of black people that are produced recently are Ecclesiastes movies. Life under the sun, things are set against you. No matter how hard you work, there's going to be forces arrayed against you. And maybe I just liked a movie that's like a Book of Proverbs movie, which is a person who seeks wisdom like somebody seeking gold. A person who seeks wisdom like somebody seeking silver. Doesn't mean that they always found it or that he's a bastion of wisdom, but this is a guy, like a simple guy who saw some hope and pursued it. It was like a feel-good movie, not sentimentality, but like if you get a plan that's good and you work it like crazy, the land of opportunity might reward you. You know, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. It's kind of great.
Yeah.
Well, and then we see him as the negotiator too, right? Because
yes,
I was at Proverbs 20:14 says, bad says the buyer, but when he goes away, then he boasts. And we see them. We see that it translates to the daughter even. It's like she's inculcated some of that wisdom to be like, something doesn't feel right. I need to not take this offer, even though it's $3 million staring her in the face. Can you imagine a 14-year-old turning it down?
Wow,
like that
$3 million?
Yeah.
As the dad of a 14-year-old, I can tell you that's not something that would typically happen.
I didn't really think about this yet, but the parable of like the pearl of great price, somebody who's in a field discovers a pearl, right? And he sees the value of the pearl, buries it, goes and sells everything he has to purchase the field to get the pearl, right? And so so we go, as Christians, what is that supposed to teach us? That we sell everything in this life to achieve the pearl of great price of salvation and connection to God. Right, and this movie, so a redeem kind of thing, they saw the value in their skills and financial success in this world, but it shows us a picture of when you know what's really valuable, you start to make decisions that might look crazy to people around you, but end up actually being wise and very thoughtful. Like I like in the country club when Richard is teaching the girls when they're eating the hamburgers and stuff, and the girl from Privilege is like, all this food is free, you know, as they're walking away, and Richard's telling his daughter, never take anything from anyone for free. Everything in this place has got hooks in it. Proverbs 29:5 says, a man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. That's what wrong with me. Everything in this place has got hooks in it. People are saying, let me take the burden of your daughter's career off your hands. Let us just, and you know that they got hooks in it because they see something valuable in her, and they see that that the temptation for a quick success and quick money is something that they could use to leverage this poor black guy from the ghetto, you know. But they know what they have, and they reject the flattery.
I think there's a picture of that too in Proverbs 23, a very similar thing, 23 verses 6-8. Where it says, do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy, do not desire his delicacies, for he is like one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the morsels that you have eaten and waste your pleasant words. Like this idea of like, be careful who you take that from. Like there's generosity there, but it's for a purpose, and they're calculating. It's a cost analysis to these sorts of people. And that's really what that is. Like, let's win them over with a bunch of free food and treat them like royalty here at this club, and we'll get what we want from them. And I think that's kind of what this proverb is speaking to as well. And, you know, it's interesting that he embodies in this movie a lot of different proverbs. Like, we're picking up on that. They made it a point to show his faith throughout as well. Like, that's one of the things that he prioritized, that they have to get to Kingdom Hall, right? It's not necessarily the faith that we have, but they were showing that. And this is a man that probably would be familiar with the Proverbs. It does make you wonder, like, was there some thought behind that? Did he try to live out some of what he had read in Scripture as far as Proverbs was concerned?
I'd like to think that he's a Jehovah's Witness that spends time in his Bible in the book of Proverbs.
I sure would like to think so.
They do spend their time in the Bibles. Yeah, it was hard for me not to think about this podcast as one to take a jab at Jehovah's Witnesses, but
Easy to
it was
do.
so close. These people are so close to my faith compared to stories of other people on film. It's like, I'll take it today. The Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those rare. I mean, I wonder if the secular world can really distinguish. Do they think Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christians are kind of all in the same bag? I would assume a fair amount of Americans probably think something like that to some degree, and so just the fact that they made sure to include that in the dialogue and a positive portrayal of an Abrahamic faith that isn't Islam, I guess that was nice. It's always nice to see that they're at least acknowledging that people actually have spirituality and faith in their lives. Because so many movies, and even a lot of biopics, sometimes you just wash that all out, and they don't claim to be secularists, but their behavior evinces no faith. And so even just injecting that back into the conversation, I think breeds conversations about faith. People in this movie actually go to worship services. People actually this is a part of their life. Huh. Like that.
Similar to Daredevil and Catholicism. Like, it kind of gave me that sort of a vibe.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It's not us. It's not our team per se, but it's close enough, and it's a win for for a biblical worldview sort of portrayal. Like, there's enough crossover that it's still a win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that feeling too. I felt just a little bit represented.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think in Richard's notes that you sent us, one of the things I love that we seem to all have caught was how encouraging he was. How encouraging Richard was to his daughters. I was surprised because I expected this movie to be one about sure they had success, but he crushed their spirit to do it. Kind of like I think, what is the movie? Is it Whiplash? That I think David talks about that one a lot. The drumming movie with Miles Teller, where that's a movie that makes you struggle with okay, in order to be great, what do you have to sacrifice? And is it worth it? That movie is great for that kind of thing. And it's not the only movie with that theme. And I expected Richard to be that kind of figure where it's like, okay, he produced 2 Michael Jordans of his sport, but at what cost? And there's a little bit of that in that. But surprisingly, this whole movie, the way they portrayed him, the girls are giggling during practice, and he's saying, it's always like, that's good, Venus. Good job, good hit, Serena. You guys have done real good today. Just encouragement.
And fast forward to when she loses, right?
Yeah.
At the end, and still there. I was surprised. I was having no history in what really happened. I was expecting that kind of film, so I kept expecting the dime to turn. I thought it was going to turn when he starts to drive away from them, and although I did like that he did his own little film in theology.
Yes,
let's stop and point that out.
That was awesome.
Cinderella.
I thought that too.
So what did we learn? And
I can't wait to sit my whole family down and say, "What did you learn?" And then when they tell me, say, "Wrong, you're all wrong." Let's watch it again.
And if they answer sarcastically or jokingly, send them to their room. They're not taking it serious. Yep.
That's what I'm gonna start doing at film and theology events. So get out.
Get out. You're not taking this seriously.
But
you're right though, because then he actually, he was trying to tell him about humility, and yet then they jumped to that scene at the country club next. Like, he was telling them, like, even though she was in a low position and kind of being mistreated, like she just stayed humble and dutiful. And then they cut to the country club scene, and again I thought they were going to go in a different direction, because I felt he could have turned down that deal, but it felt like he incited some of the strife between them at the table.
Yeah,
and it seemed like he wasn't following his own advice, which he'd just given the kids about Cinderella. And so then I was like, oh no, is this movie going to turn into him just becoming harder and harder and edgier and edgier, and does he mistreat the girls? But then it didn't, and I think that's probably more true to life. People tend to have ups and downs and waverings, but usually our stuff isn't quite as dramatic tip turn as Hollywood films. So it was interesting. He was certainly a man who bounced up and down, and probably had more faults that they alluded to off screen, and yet he had some consistent through lines where he kept coming back to some of that, the faithful parenting of the kids. That's a good. I thought that was a nice mixed bag.
There could be some good crossover conversation there too about what humility actually looks like. Like, you get that pithy saying from I think Tim Keller, but I don't know if he got it from somewhere else, about humility is not about thinking less of yourself; it's about thinking of yourself less. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
That scene in the country club. Like, there could be some debate there. Like, did that conflict with the idea of having humility and being humble? Does being humble mean not seeing your full worth and just accepting whatever comes along? And
well, and I would say
he had personal reasons that were part of the disagreement for sure.
Right. See, I think turning down the deal was totally appropriate, because even Jesus tells his disciples to be shrewd as snakes. Right. So he's trying to be shrewd. It just felt like there are several ways he could have taken that statement about what they had to work with.
Yes.
About his family. That could have been an honest saying about, like, I know you had limited resources, but you've done amazing. Right. But he pillories that guy for that statement.
Like, that
felt a little harsh
to me. Yeah.
It's like, this is the point of your story, right? This is why you're so attractive to people in the media. This is why you're going to get a huge Nike deal, because you represent people who are underrepresented. That's the point.
And in the end, that seems to have been the case. They weren't wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that's
so I thought he was with that first meeting where he denies that money and stuff. I thought he was a little unnecessarily rude, but wise at the same time.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, that's a lot of us. That's okay.
And that's more of a reality, I think, that we face as Christians sometimes. Sometimes we'll even make the right decision, but did we have the right disposition, right? There's always those interactions to where I could always look back and say, no, I absolutely made the right call, but I could have comported myself better.
Yeah.
Or I can have fault and yet still have been right. And I think that's, if you have a marriage, you learn that. So,
and it's almost like this movie's not about Richard having the character that everybody wants. It's about a man from humble beginnings who did everything it took to make his daughters into somebody who comports themselves well. Like, I'm going to make you Cinderella. So one of my favorite lines in the movie is when Brandy Williams, when they're first sending Venus out, says, she knows who she is. We've done our job. And it's all, I wrap that up into the theme of encouragement, right? Venus Williams, who's your best friend? That they prepared these girls to be, well, it's funny. Rick would say killers, absolute killers, but they weren't. They were like emotionally gentle, athletically fierce, confident, humble women,
like
right? Like, just they were great. I wanted to be friends with.
What was that again? Girls. Emotionally. Say that again. The gentle,
like emotionally gentle, like athletically fierce, but emotionally gentle.
Yeah, I like
women. That. Like, because you would see, like, in their interviews, I'd like somebody to want to play like me. Really, 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 really confident statement, but not in the way that Muhammad Ali would say it. Right?
Yeah.
That's just that I have put in the work. My parents have trained me every day since I was like 6 years old, and this is what I'm fighting for. It was just kind of great, and it's all because of this encouragement. And I was like, man, I want to be that kind of parent.
Well, and they were getting that encouragement from Rick Macy as well. I thought he was also just watching John Bernthal's acting was great. John Bernthal and that thing living on his lip.
He became another person.
Yeah.
Like, it took me a second to realize who I was seeing, and then I had to IMDb it to make sure I wasn't wrong, because I was like, is that really him?
It's the Punisher in disguise.
Yeah. That was good.
Yeah, like this. One of my favorite encouragement. It was a great show don't tell moment in the movie, where he's going, like, that was good, Venus. At the end, you want to know why? Or that wasn't good. Yeah, he says, that wasn't good at the end. You want to know why? And Venus says, because it was excellent. Right, as if this is something they say all the time, and like had this warm relationship. And in one scene of training, they proved to me, okay, this guy trained them super, super hard, but he was an encouragement. He was a wind in their sails. And I was like, man, that's just a brilliantly written, brilliantly acted scene.
Yes.
To show how, like, Richard found the right coach who's going to be all about intensity and effort and excellence, but also encouraged encouraged those girls. And I just
I had someone who legitimately cared about them beyond making the money.
yeah,
And I think they did a good job of striking that balance. Not that he wasn't a businessman, but when he goes to Dad on behalf of Venus, you get the idea that's sincerity and actual affection. Like he even looks at her. He's like, "Oh, I can't
That
say no to
face.
you. Like, darn it, I can't do that." You actually had a great, you had this great sort of surrogate uncle type of relationship that he was showing us there, to the point where like I felt bad for him when he's talking in the driveway and Dad pushes back.
Yes.
And that was one of those that was where like you have two men, I believe, fundamentally trying to do the best things.
yeah,
And yet at odds ideologically, which is also right, as Christians sometimes we find ourselves in those places. There are going to be times where theologically we're on the same page, but application or even how ideology comes out of some of that, certain applications, politics, whatever, it may take different permutations. And we probably, Dad stands resolute. He takes a cheap shot and says, "You work for us," which kind of disregards all Macy's done.
yeah.
Like,
Well, and
that's
Macy
sort of
goes like, "Oh,
denigrating.
that's a nice house. Who paid for that again?" And
Yeah.
Richard
And
turns
it's
around.
like-
"You're better than that, right?" I was like, "Well, you kind of took
Yeah.
us there."
That was an interesting line too, because right after that he gets in a fight with his wife and says, "How do you think we got all this?"
Yeah.
Like, how is
Yeah.
he not doing the exact same thing that
Yeah.
he just said? Don't you do that?
Yeah.
You're better than that.
That's a-
And then he turns around. I thought that had to be an intentional story.
I think
that
so.
They were doing there.
I think that was well written
Yeah.
scene. Yeah, it's just so interesting.
Well, so then with her there, that's so three people all wanting the best for Venus,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
yet sparring with each other, evidencing some hypocrisy and needing some humility. That's probably a lesson for all of it. You think about a church trying to lead its kids and youth, or a kids ministry, you have all these competing ideas of how to run some of those things and actually care for these young lives that you're being brought up in. There has to be some deference, obviously, to the head of the household, and yet you want to influence and you want to actually sometimes you want to encourage the head of the household to maybe think differently. I think we see these interactions in all sorts of Christian ways that are not dissimilar from tennis in this regard.
Yeah, there was so much of that where if I just plucked out tennis from the movie and put in discipleship into that,
Yeah.
it's like all of this stuff just light bulbs flashing in my head of just like this. An obvious verse. I think my wife picked this up right away when I was just describing the movie to her. Is Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. I think this movie showed you the very upper edge of what training is. And me and my wife were discussing this a little bit. Like, you can't make a child believe in Jesus. You can't make them love Jesus. But you can make sure that they know the Bible. You can give them skills. You can train at least their manners and shape their character to some extent. And so, like, I love this line, like when the CPS is called on Richard and he says, "I don't mind you saying we hard on these kids, because we are. That's our job, to keep them off these streets," which was repeated like 3 or 4 times in the movie. Our job is to keep them off these streets. And this movie just gave me hope that even in our world, even when social media is beamed into their room, trying to pull them away from Christ, pull them in all kinds of different directions, laying nets for their feet in Proverbs terms, it is possible to train up your child in the way that he or she should go.
Well, and we see where this goes, right? Because we see the other kids on the street. We see both what they have become, like the one threatening and even holding a gun to Richard's head, and then what becomes of him, right? Because then we see the drive-by. I was like, what? That's a beautiful commentary there, and I think that's contrasted by then we see, even despite the best efforts, perhaps the girl-driven a little too hard in the juniors, who winds up in a hotel room with crack and some men visiting. So again, it kind of calls us back to, and it's a frustrating tension to have to put parents in the middle of.
Narrow path there somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It's like there's a narrow path between like both those things end badly. if they're handled too hard.
And the Bible does give us admonition about not exasperating our kids at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Bible acknowledges that there's a reality but there's danger in either extreme.
Like one of my least favorite verses from Ecclesiastes is don't be, over righteous? Something like that.
Don't be overly righteous.
Don't be overly righteous. You're like, are you sure? Are you sure, Kohelet? Okay, it's in the Bible.
It's interesting too, like the way that the neighbors view them. Like that's why CPS gets called on them. That's why all this stuff takes place. They see them as like this crazy family that is being harmful to their kids, and I think we see that play itself out in like the Christian life in a lot of different ways. This isn't a statement about like what the right way to educate any kid is. I think that's like a case-by-case basis, family-by-family basis.
Yeah.
But if you're a family that decides I'm going to homeschool a bunch of kids and we're going to be like doing crafts and crazy, you have people look at that and think like, oh my goodness, they're over sheltering those poor kids and they're going to be socially awkward and it's really wrong what they're doing to them. But the idea is the same. Like I see what everybody else around me is doing and what that has led to. Let me try something different. I'm trying to avoid that. And it gets, he makes comments about that to people in the neighborhood that when you first hear him, I was like, man, that was kind of rude to say that to them. But at the same time, if they're going to criticize the way he's parenting when he's just trying to avoid pitfalls that they failed to avoid, I think we see that a lot in life.
It was usually a response to people, right? Like the lady telling them they're too hard. And he says, I told you to don't talk to these girls. He's like, they're in my yard.
Yes.
But
right.
Or like the guys, right? They are interested in short-term pleasure, right? So this gangstery guy hanging out by the tennis is like, hey, what's up, Tundi? Like talking through. That's why I remembered her name, because the guy was calling her.
Said it 100 times.
Right? And he goes and takes the beating from him and stuff. But there's this sentiment that he shares. What, you feel like you're better than us or something? Right? That's what the guy says. You feel like you're better than us or something? And I know that I have friends at work because I work night security, kind of like Richard, at a hospital in a rough city. And some of my friends who are actually from that city get a lot of this, do you think you're better than me or something? Because instead of hanging around doing X, Y, or Z on their street, they're out working double shifts at a hospital with me, hanging out with me. And there is a lot of that, I think, in your communities when you start trying to be great, right? Haters are going to hate, as they say. And I thought that they portrayed that pretty well in this movie, where people felt judged or uncomfortable by their attempts to be great. But then they also win some people over by the end of the movie, where those guys, like when the coach is coming by, those same gangster guys who beat up Richard early are like, hey, what are you doing in here? Right? They became guards of these girls eventually, because in their own way, that's how they could help them become great. But this relationship to the neighbors, I thought that was really interesting, and I think very true to life.
So do you think it's wrong to say yes to that?
Wrong to say yes to which one? Which part?
You feel like you're better than us.
Man.
What's the answer?
Man, there's a part of me, the logical part of me, that goes, if I'm Richard, yeah. Or at least these choices are better. You can at least say that because, like, look, the tennis court is in the neighborhood. Right? You could be working hard on something too.
I think with that, there's that same tension of, like I talked about earlier, like encouraging them but working them really hard in Christian theology, like recognizing depravity and sinfulness, but the image of God, that sort of thing. I think with something like that, it's, yeah, I do, but the Christian response is, but not because of me, like, but for the grace of God, I'd be worse than you are. But yes, by God's grace, I do think that the way that our family is structured right now, or whatever it might be they're talking about, is better than the way yours is. We can talk about that. It's not a prideful thing if it's in the right attitude.
Yeah, and it'll provoke self-consciousness in people. Like Rory in our chat says, in Scotland we call this wee little man syndrome. And he references the verse, can anything come good, or anything good come from Nazareth, or Compton? Can anything good come from Compton? There's those those are the things that this brings up. And anywhere you live, it doesn't matter if it's in the ghetto or anywhere else or in your nice little church community, when you're trying to pursue greatness, you might provoke that kind of response from people.
Yeah.
You know, like
Well, based on what you're saying, I think I would say, based on what you guys are talking about, I think I'd probably pick something akin to, no, I think I'm making, do you think you're better than us? No, I think I'm making better choices, and you could too.
or it might
Right?
be better,
I mean,
like
that's,
he didn't answer. He just said, I'm in the champion making business. I'm just going to focus on what I'm doing. I'm not,
yeah.
to not responding to that question would probably be the most wise.
Well, yeah, in the moment, it might be the wrong question to ask, but depending on what you're facing, a gun in the face, I'm not sure. I might choose the answer differently than somebody actually just seeming to be frustrated with me.
Yeah.
But I think there is something to that, to where there's a false humility. We were talking about humility earlier. There's a false humility where it's like, no, we're all different. It's like, no, actually, because if it wasn't somebody asking me that question, if I heard somebody asking Richard that question, I'd want to go over to them after and say, you're doing better. You are doing better.
Yeah, I'd want to
encourage him. I want to encourage you in that. Like, you're choosing better than those people who are frustrated with you. It's funny. I did a tour in Australia talking about the synagogue book, and there they call it tall poppy syndrome. It's kind of similar to wee man syndrome, where it's like,
that's great.
You need to lop the heads off the poppies if they're higher than the rest of them, and it's like, man, that's such a what a bad way to bring people down. I love in the movie, if this was a part of the true story, which I'm guessing it is, I see like those other kind of thug-like people in the neighborhood actually kind of took on Richard's and the family in a form of protection.
Yes.
I thought that was very cool. It's like if we get one of us, if we can launch some of us out of here, there's aspiration and hope for all of us, right? That it's the counter to the wee man or the tall poppy syndrome. It's like, no, wait, if we together as a community could elevate one of us, then that's a celebration for all of us.
And that section of scenes tells kind of a sad story too, because it kind of argues that one of those guys is kind of like a weed in your community and needs to be plucked. And like Richard was about to go commit a crime, which probably would have derailed this whole plan, because he was in a low point. He had a gun in his hand, was walking across the street, and then that guy gets shot. And he was kind of the ringleader of the bad behavior of that group of hoodlums, for lack of a better way to put it. And once that guy was gone, those people now became like this protective neighborhood, good neighbors to the Williams. And that was just this small piece of the story that you might not even catch that really sticks.
And I don't know, like, this is all based on a true story. I don't know if exactly that took place, what we saw there or not. But boy, didn't that seem providential.
Yeah.
That he's going there presumably to do something like that, and then God arranges that something like that takes place right in front of him. I don't know if that's true, or if they dramatized it a little bit. Maybe he didn't see it happen or something.
Yeah.
Like he was thinking about going to do it. I don't know. But that felt very providential.
Yeah,
like,
God
I'm going to use
spared
other
him.
wicked men to accomplish
God,
what you were just about to do.
Certainly.
Because it would be wrong for you to do it. So I'll use other wrong people to accomplish this purpose.
So maybe in the middle of a story
that's
that's all about working your good plan, and you're such a wise person who worked this wise plan, there's grace where God basically spared him from the folly of his bad choices. Right? So it's not totally in your control, and you need to have a little more humility that God saved him, or depending on what is the perspective of the filmmakers. But if this is a true story, I think God saved him from ending up in jail. He could have ended up in jail anyway, right? Fleeing the scene with a gun, right? In this,
I was thinking that. I was like, dude, get out of there. You're
van.
standing there with a gun.
Yeah. It could have been a very different story, yeah.
Well, and I think all the ways God's providence had to show up, even just in the heart of them as spouses, right? I mean, like, his wife probably had several reasons to be frustrated with and jettison him, which they only allude to, but she coughs out in that one dramatic scene where he made other bad choices than just with that gun, and yet she stuck by him, though she had probably what we'd call biblical rights to jettison him, and she stayed for the kids, for the family, for the plan. She she forgave. Like there's some. He definitely had a lot of grace given to him from multiple sources.
Yeah.
And anyway, the 78-page plan was not what got it there. Man makes his plans, but God determines his steps.
Yeah.
It's like so.
Yeah.
So providence made that plan come together, which doesn't denigrate having a plan. I think too many times Christians can get lax and say, well, we can actually rest on the laurels of grace and not do wisdom and shrewd planning.
Yeah,
and kind of try to write it off.
I remember a Matt Chandler bit about men finding a wife, and he's like, "You're sitting there praying, Lord, send me a wife." He's like, "You don't do that about dinner." Sitting there on the couch saying, "Lord, if you will, please send me a sandwich." And he's like, "There's got to be a part of this. Get up and do something."
Right.
But this,
yeah.
But like the point that you're on, that man, I love the portrayal of family in this movie. Like, of course, the strongest picture of, I think, biblical family dynamic was Brandy Williams giving grace after grace after grace, and silently, I carried her in my belly, and I carried her on my back, metaphorically. Oh, that's great. It reminded me of Colossians 3:18-21, which is like this whole family picture. It says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children..."
Boy, that one gets me all the time.
Yes. "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." And I was like, oh, man, that's this whole picture. Probably the weakest portrayal of this in this movie, actually, is husbands, love your wives. There wasn't too much, a little bit of affection at the beginning, a little bit of like love talk, but this whole picture, wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. She has that argument when Richard fires the coach without telling her beforehand. And she goes, "Are we a team? Yep. We should have discussed this first." And she says, "My faith dictates that I stand by your side, but don't take my silence as agreement." That is submission, right? Agreement is just agreement, but that is submission. My faith dictates that I stand by your side, but don't take my silence as agreement. Man, I was like, that's great. It's a powerful example of the strength of a woman who submits to her husband, but she's not just a pushover. She's not uninvolved. She's coaching her girls. She's working double shifts. When Venus is out with a coach and Richard, she's coaching Serena back in the hood.
Yeah.
Like, Brandy was great, and she's kind of in the background, right? She doesn't get the accolades. Her name's not in the title of the movie, but she was doing the same things as Richard.
I even like in that line that she had said, she basically even warns him, like, I'm doing that this time. Like,
yes.
Next time.
Yes.
I'm not going to be silent. Like, I'm telling you now, my faith dictates I respond in this way, but just so you know, there will come a point where I'm going to have to say something.
Yeah, and that's not being gentle or dwelling with your wife with understanding, I think as 1 Peter says. Right? Don't be harsh with them.
Yeah.
And be not telling your wife about these decisions, that is being harsh. That's emotionally harsh. That's logistically harsh in a family.
Yes.
Well, it goes back to something we were talking about earlier. As Rory dropped a comment in our chat, like there's a difference between being right and being righteous, and I get caught by that all the time. And I think we see King Richard do that multiple times. Colossians 3, let's love your wife. There are times when I'm right. That's like, oh, but I was harsh. Gosh darn it! So it's like I was right about the situation, but I was not righteous. And I think we see, even though so much of Richard's plan does bear out as being fruitful and the way to go, we see him being unrighteous in the way he's dealing with his wife and then Macy in some situations and then with the kids to some degrees here and there. But we also see him at least accept the pushback and in a couple places seemingly learn, which is great too. I mean, that's as a Christians, I hope we want to be like Richard in those ways where he does seem flexible, where he then does go talk to his daughter after she fires a few tennis balls into him.
Yeah. I like it. So we can tell he struggles with pride. When he's with Rick Macy and Rick is telling perspective from his daughter, trying to get her to play juniors, I think. He goes, I don't say this very often. You're not wrong, Rick Macy. Just kind of walks up. That's what you're going to get from me now. Like, okay. Oh, man, that's another proverb. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but an enemy multiplies kisses. It's probably my favorite proverb of all of them. Just because I got to remind myself that nice isn't always loving, and these people were willing to love him, and in particular, everybody was loving those girls, where they would challenge him. Make him, you're not wrong, Rick Macy. And this movie got to some of Richard's, like, his vulnerability, you know, that when his wife is yelling at him, you know, talking about, here's all the reasons I have to leave you, and I'm not, because my faith dictates I'm standing by your side. I'm following somebody higher than Richard Williams, right? I stay here because of my girls, because I answer to something higher than Richard Williams, right? So she's reminding him, this is what's keeping me here, not how charming or smart you are. But they get down to his struggle. You know, you're afraid that everyone will see you as just another dumb N-word, right? And then she says, I never did. And I was like, that's respect. You know, Ephesians 5:33. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. There's a whole book and a school of thought just about relationships where it's like women in general crave love from their husbands, and husbands in general crave respect from their wives. And she did a really good job of showing respect even when she's challenging him on all of his sin. Right to his face.
Yeah, I think in a Hollywood movie probably would have had more of a, like, I can imagine that playing out where you want to take a cheap shot. You're like, I never thought you were another one of those dumb.
Yeah.
But you're starting to act like one. There could have been that jab, the jab that comes in, and I say that because, while certainly not using the N-word, I know in fights with my wife, I know I have. I'll just speak for myself. Like I've taken those jabs where you take the easy jab, you know, isn't really you hyperbolize how you feel and sort of go a little further than is even truthful, just to dig in there. And I love that she doesn't do that. Like she has an amazing she's a woman of amazing character in this movie.
Yeah,
and
I think it's easy that she might get forgotten watching this movie, but she was an amazing. Like she got onto Richard's plan, right, and she made it happen. It's great. Like, okay, this is a good plan. Like maybe that would be like, young men, find your discipleship plan, work it, and find somebody who can team up with you. And now go join and do ministry, love your neighbor, love God, make disciples. Go.
Well, maybe that's a fault that, as we're talking, that one could see in this film. It would have been interesting to see a little more of her perspective. Like, you could have approached some of these events and even angles a little more from her perspective. You could have shared it, because it definitely does seem like the King Richard dominates most of the screen time, and obviously that's sort of what an actor wants for the Oscar. But you could have had a little bit more. I think maybe inadvertently what this film does is it plays into what some accuse him of being a relentless self-promoter. That's like, well, he does get to earn he gets most of the screen time in this movie, even though it's not him, it's the actor who's playing him. Like, he kind of earns most of the screen time, and you could have shown, like, it's taken all this conversation with you guys to sort of get to appreciating what a depth of character that his wife has. And so, why did it take me this long to get there? Well, the movie could have done a little more, perhaps, to show that bearing of the load. Maybe that's just my one critique, because parts of the movie that kind of allude to this self-promotion, I'm guessing that's stuff we could look up outside of the film itself, because it does seem like, what was it? Rick Macy says he sees on TV, I see the Richard Williams show, $1 Million #1, greatest of all time. And we see that he's sort of selling himself in a weird way that the movie doesn't zero in on quite as much.
And it was, I wasn't sure, like Rory Thomas in our group was talking about, this is what annoys me about Richard Williams. You know, he clearly loves his children, but he's also such a relentless self-promoter. He's stubborn, controlling, and unfathomably tenacious. Right? That was better put than I would. That's why I'm quoting Rory. Like even when he refers to his humble beginnings in Louisiana, it is to make himself big. It's what we call like false humility.
I might differ there with Rory a little bit. I did watch that scene a couple more times. He may have stumbled into that in the speaking of it. I think maybe the words of it could imply that. I'm not sure in the film I was supposed to believe that his heart was really in that place. I think he was striving for earnestness. So maybe, I don't know if I'd quite go that far, but
I didn't take it earnestly. I took it as strategy. I thought that,
interesting.
So I got a 78-page plan, and I've seen Muhammad Ali work the media to his advantage. That's kind of where I was taking it, right? So there's this line in the movie that says, "This world ain't ever had no respect for Richard Williams, but they gonna respect y'all," referring to all of his daughters in the back. And it's almost like, I don't know, because it didn't show the actual, like, all the interviews, because I get the distinct impression that Richard Williams is really fun to watch for 2.5 hours, but was probably hard to hang out with for 2.5 months. You know? Like, I think that...
No, I think you're right. I think the part about his Louisiana beginnings was just, that was a talk with his daughter, not to the press.
Okay, yeah.
And I think in that scene, I think he was trying to get the right point across to his daughter in that scene. But I still agree. I mean, I think his false humility and his problems with pride bear itself out in plenty of other places.
Yeah. But I think the greatest point in this movie, though, that was really good balance to make this not in the category of Whiplash, was that Richard was pursuing his goals. You know, like pursuing your goals without losing your soul. Right. And Mark 8, Jesus says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his own soul? And so there were all these opportunities for them to gain, quote unquote, the whole world, not achieve the greatness that they were after. $1 million, $3 million, $4 million, these kind of things. The end credit scenes, it was like 9 months after that big tournament that they finally signed. That's a lot of saying no, waiting for the right opportunity. And I love that Richard points out, this junior circuit is worse than the ghetto with all of these tennis parents. Right? Apparently another quote that he didn't actually say, but they quoted him as saying, "Tennis parents ought to be shot." And I don't know about you guys, but I work in a rough area, but I live in an area with a lot of those kind of tennis parent type people where they want the best for their kids. Their kids are in club soccer, club baseball, all this stuff, and there's just all this kind of pressure on them. And a lot of the pastors in our area are like, "Look, are you training disciples? Are you training little baseball stars? Are you training little soccer stars? Like, you're not in church on Sunday, but you're at all these games," which is, in isolation might not be a sin, but look at what the direction of your priorities, in life. But Richard was willing to, when he saw the tennis star who had fallen and was caught with drugs in a hotel with like men on the way. What does he do the next day? Cancels practice and takes his girls to Disneyland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he did not idolize kids' success. It's their kids' success. He wasn't trying to get rich quick. He wasn't trying to prostitute out his daughters in the sense of tennis so that they could get the big house, right? Even though that was part of the plan. It's not bad to be great, but they didn't lose their soul. Man, I thought that was such a great piece of this story.
Well, and he wanted them to have other things besides tennis. I mean, you think about a lot of the prodigies. You think about like Mozart's dad, or you think about usually all they know is the one thing that they're good at, and they just get pressed by their parents. And I like where you were taking it earlier too, to where parents even do that, whether they're indulging their kids' desires or whether they're pressuring them into some of the sports and different activities, so that they're not getting catechized. Richard wanted them to go to the Kingdom Hall. We would want, they're not in church. Like, you're developing their worldly skills at the expense of their faith. Yeah. Whereas the world can watch this movie and understand it's great that they know 4 different languages. It's great that they have straight A's in case they didn't want to go on with tennis and they wanted to pursue other paths in life or other things. Like, that's wonderful. As a Christian, I would add to that too. Like, are you pushing them so much in those things that you aren't putting the proper investment into their actual faith and their actual growth in Christ? Or Yeah. And
that could be so damaging too. Like I was listening to a podcast recently, and one of the things that come up is, just how to find joy in the life that you have and enjoyment from it and what that looks like. And one of the things that they talked about was how when people, part of doing that is setting out goals for yourself and trying to meet them and striving for them and then meeting them. But one of the things they talked about was the propensity that once you do meet that goal, depending on how you did it, why you did it, all those things, you can fall into a very deep depression afterwards if you don't know what the next goal is and the next goal is. And you can get to the point where if that's all there is, you're just chasing goals. There's a valley that comes after each success like that. They reference like people that have won gold medals in the Olympics and fell into deep depression afterwards because it's done.
Yeah.
This is what I was working for. This was all I was working for.
Like Deion Sanders, his testimony is, I won the Super Bowl. I picked up the phone and I ordered a sports car. It was like a Lamborghini. And then I had the loneliest night of my life. And that was like when he tells his Christian testimony. That's one of the pivot
And
points.
it's funny you say that because what I was thinking to myself is, what's the big question people always ask after you win something like that? And then the meme is, I'm going to Disney World. What are you going to do next? He took them to Disney World before they won.
Yeah.
All that. Like you can live now. Like you don't have to. Like you're not living just for that. Like you're building a foundation that's more than that. And these goals you set up ought to be serving some other purpose. They can't be the purpose.
Yeah.
And I think he saw that. If this portrayal of him is accurate, it seems like he saw that.
Yeah, that's what I've been kind of struggling with. Oh, let's take the movie at face value, right? Because we rarely do biopics.
Yes.
So let's just take the movie as the movie. What is the movie preaching?
Let's just assume it's true.
It's that
I don't know.
You can create excellent athletes and great students and good people and kids who are kids all at the same time, but it's going to take a plan and it's going to take really hard work, right? And I was like,
and a lot of hard decision making.
A lot of hard decision making, and
you're going to need a lot of counselors.
And you won't be. Yeah, you need wisdom, and your neighbors are not going to always appreciate what you've done. You might get beat up for it. You might have to have fights, but you can train up
people will get defensive because they're not doing it.
Yeah, you're gonna have people that happens a lot in conversations at church. Somebody who's cut out sin habits that basically plague everybody in the church, and somebody actually succeeds, and people get real sheepish around that person because they actually did it. They actually repented. They actually cut it out of their lives. And they'll start to...
It's evidence you could too, and you're not. You don't want that.
Yep.
You don't want that.
And so
we don't want that.
That's what this movie hit me with as a parent is I can actually train up a child in the way I should go. Or as James was pointing out in the Deuteronomy sense, you could be talking to them about the gospel as you crammed all your kids into your Volkswagen van as you're going to train, right? All these things. You can train up your child in the way they should go. You can give them the tools to succeed. I'm actually really interested in what happened to all those other daughters. He talks about, I got a future lawyer, a future doctor. I was like, was that prophecy? Is that movie telling them that that's what they actually did? Because that's more interesting to me because even though Venus and Serena, they did all the work, they are also, if you look at them, they are athletically gifted, and it's not you can't make a Michael Jordan of the sport. There's a lot of providence in that, but you can get your kid off these streets. Right, you can give them the tools at least to get off these streets, and it just gave me hope. It gave me hope, and it challenged me at the same time. I like this movie.
But I love it. I love the Cinderella actual phrase that they respond like. It says she was humble, no matter how she was treated, disrespected. She kept her heart clean, and that's. It's funny because we see in the movie that certainly Richard stumbles up and down with that.
Yeah,
but yet I think that's probably more of an honest depiction of the Christian walk. Like I read this right here. Like, no matter how I'm treated or disrespected, I keep my heart clean. Like, well, that hasn't been true of me. Mm-mm. Just like it isn't true there of Richard. But that doesn't mean it's not the right aspiration for a Christian to have.
That's a big struggle in the Christian life, especially as a parent or someone who's discipling someone, is teaching them ideals that you've imperfectly helped.
Yeah.
Because that's all of them.
Yeah, I'm going to be preaching on...
that's all of them. If you tell someone the right way, it's something that you have succeeded and failed in yourself.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I'm preaching Matthew 23 this Sunday, right? I mean, he says he's woeing to the Pharisees because they do not practice what they preach. And it's like, but I mean, at some point, at some point I have not practiced what I preach, like no matter how, like, so there's, but that should not, I mean, like having a bad tennis game or having a bad tennis match or losing that match like Venus does at the end. Well, that doesn't mean I give up. I mean, why do we fall down?
Yeah, so we can learn to pick ourselves up. Batman reference right before the end.
Threw that.
That's great.
We almost made it. We almost made it.
I had to throw that one over the net to you, Miles.
Perhaps at the end of the movie, Venus thinks, "Oh, I didn't reach greatness because I didn't reach number 1," and Richard could come in and be like, "By what standard are you judging whether you are great or not?"
I gotta tell you all keep saying Richard, and I have to determine every time: are you talking about me or Richard Williams? And I gotta believe this is how David feels every time Church gets into 1st and 2nd Samuel.
Yeah.
I gotta believe like this is just his life. And I'm sorry, David, this is hard.
Yeah.
Like I'm learning this is hard to deal with.
My middle name is Paul, and I remember when I was a kid, I would like not really be paying attention in church, but every time they mentioned Paul, I would perk up. I'd pay attention. Like, that's a useful tool, naming your kid something biblical, so at least they'll maybe pop their head up.
I'm also learning whenever I see something really, really bad in the news, or I'm worried that someone in my family is going to be in trouble, taking the day off going to Disney World. There we go. That's
yeah.
Man, there's wisdom in that. Like it might not be going to, but doing something. Like I can't, like this is too big of a choice that I've got to face right now. I haven't truly made, like just go get your mind off of it. Like there's some wisdom in that. There really is.
Just going, being kids, like I thought it was, they didn't show them taking a Sabbath, but maybe they did. I don't know. I'm actually not sure how strict Jehovah's Witnesses are on the Sabbath. But that's basically what he did. He's like...
They got to Kingdom Hall.
Like,
I don't know.
This kid is overworked. I'm going to react. Like, say what you will about a lot of Richard's choices and his stubbornness. He would react and try to make wise choices. I don't want my daughter to be this. I'm not going to burn her out. I'm not going to sacrifice her on the altar of quick success. And so I'm...
Like, at times even frustrating the kids.
And frustrating
like
the
they
kids,
want to do
frustrating
more.
the coaches,
and they're frustrated. But he's saying, "Like I'm your dad, I know better. We got to do it this way." It's definitely an interesting picture. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's the his boldness, his conviction, and his sheer effort to try to make the wisest choices he could think possible. You know, that is just such a commendable lesson. And it's very ironic because this movie made its way onto my radar because Will Smith made not the wisest choice in public. Right?
I was about to say, like, I was going to bring that up and say we went this whole podcast without really discussing that in any depth, and that's not an invitation to do
everybody,
so.
Everybody,
because I'm glad we didn't. I'm glad we didn't do that.
Miles brought it up like a slap.
Yeah,
in the
right
face.
at the end, like a slap in the face. Right. Keep Will Smith out your mouth.
Well, maybe I would just venture this in a very brief comment. If we see some things that Richard has screwed up, and yet this biopic would encourage us to look at the overarching arc of his life,
yes,
and let that be kind of how we actually gauge what we think. And so, like, am I going to take a singular televised event of any one celebrity and let that be then how I determine whether it's the latest thing that they did or the thing somebody digs up from their Twitter feed?
Yeah.
Like, really? This is how... It's like, well, then we should all definitely despise Richard Williams.
Yeah.
Because there's obviously faults. They're like, well, so I guess we're going to despise everybody. That's not really a recipe for engaging anyone in a healthy way. I don't think.
Like, obviously...
and we can certainly...
Yeah,
we can certainly critique these things. And we can say thumbs up, thumbs down, but to dwell on them or let that rule as the reigning depiction of a character even in fiction is bad. Real life worse.
The fact that we want to throw a person out like that based on some of those negative sort of press and events and things like that, really, that's got to just be evidence that we're idolizing celebrities, right?
Yeah, and I also
we're
detected...
idolizing. Like, the only reason you need them to be perfect is if they're God. Like, if they're not idolizing, why do you need them to be perfect to enjoy some parts of what they've done?
I also detect a little bit of...
Definitely revealing.
I think that there's a lot of envy and a lot of... maybe one of my favorite parts in the movie is that first interaction with the hoodlums saying, "Do you think you're better than us?" Is that a lot of people see somebody else's success And, let's face it, it's a mixed bag of talent, hard work, and opportunity that you couldn't have planned for. Anybody who succeeds big like that. And so some of it is undeserved, right? But I think sometimes people are just waiting in the wings for a celebrity to fall because it makes them feel a lot better to bring down somebody that has kind of what they want, right? Makes them feel a little bit better to bring somebody down. So you think you're better than us?
He's really no better than me.
He's really no better than me.
He's really no better than me. Yep.
And the Christian answer is yes and no, right? It's a mixed bag of both. And I really hope that people wouldn't throw out this movie because of that. I'm so glad that I watched this movie.
That would be foolish because this movie is speaking to some of that.
Yeah.
That would be a foolish thing to do.
I guess it's like us as Christians, right? When we're preaching, I can preach a message that reaches way higher than I can live. Right, that accurately portrays me as a sinner in need of grace. Like, I'm not preaching the gospel of me or even of this podcast. We are pointing to Jesus, and saying that there is a God out there who gives wisdom generously without finding fault, and that even through a movie, you can have some access and point your direction, look up toward the one who doesn't make the mistakes that we do, who doesn't have the incredible flaws. But then also on earth, you have responsibility to do the best with what you have. And it is possible to be in the champion making business. It is possible to make something great. You don't have to have all the privilege, all the legs up. Sticking to a plan and working hard can bear fruit. And that's that Christian tension. The Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes tension. The sinner saved by grace tension. The type of thing that is illustrated really well in this movie.
Well, that's our commission, right? Leading people to Christ and having them join the throng of champions in the victory that Jesus has achieved, right? I mean, that is what we're looking for. And of course we believe that's possible. I mean, we wouldn't be Christians if we didn't believe Jesus hasn't called us to that, and that it's possible to see happen, participate in, celebrate when someone... When there is that win to be celebrated, when a sinner repents, that's game, set, match. We're rejoicing. So,
Amen.
But I imagine we could go on and on. I think about other opinions, but this is probably a great place to sort of turn it over to our listeners, turn it over to the conversation that follows, and great to have the real King Ricard with us here again on the podcast as we talk about. The quote unquote King Ricard in this movie.
It's excellent. Yeah, we definitely should, I think, close up the discussion here for us and just see where it goes in the group and Discord elsewhere. Because like you said, there are definitely a couple of other things just in my mind right now to talk about. I might even post about them just because I feel like we've talked enough right at this point. We need to wrap it up. But definitely keep that conversation going. Now, listen, normally it's David that ends this podcast. What does he say at the end? Because I feel like I could do that, but
I feel like we can amend it for the sake of the game here if we want. I think that we have served the ball. I think it has gone over to the listeners, and we believe that they can return it and they will not hit the net because they, like we, are not a mindless consumer.
Cinderella, you're as lovely as your name. Cinderella, you're a sunset in a frame. Though you're dressed in rags, you wear an air of queenly grace. Anyone